now that you know all the parts of your GONI, we're going to go ahead and start getting into measuring our patients. I am going to do an in detail introduction and setting up our patient here the first time. So if you need to reference the formalities behind that, go ahead and reference the beginning of this video. Moving forward, we'll just start with positioning and things like that. So the measurement I'm getting ready to take is shoulder flexion. So I'm going to approach my client and explain to them how and what I need from them, and then we'll get to the fun stuff. So I will approach my client and I will say, hi, my name is Mary. I am a student occupational therapy assistant. How are you today?
Good, how are you?
I am great. We are going to get into measuring some range of motion today. The first one we're going to do, I'll walk you through, and we'll get that all measured up for you. If you could go ahead and have your feet flat on the ground. You've got a nice supported back chair here. And the movement I'm gonna have you do is I want you to pretend like your hand is in an oven mitt, and you're going to go right along and take that. Perfect. Wonderful. Looks like you've got some good range of motion there. So we'll go ahead and get to measuring this. So for this movement, we are going to have our axis on the acromion process. So to find that in someone, you come up to the collarbone and you follow along, and you should feel a dip. You may have to move your patient around a little bit to find it here. Oh, there we are. So it's a little different on everyone, so you'll really have to do some movement. Go ahead and put your hand in that oven mitt. And this one, so once you find the acromion, you have to go an inch below. So you're not going to be flat against the arm, but you are going to act like there is a pin coming out of that there, and that's where your axis is going to go, an inch below the acromion process. This is going to place your stationary arm midline to the trunk, pointed towards the ground, and your movable arm is going to follow midline of the humerus here. Normal range for this movement is 0 to 180 degrees. And again, they are positioned in 90, 90, 90, feet flat, sitting, supported. So then you're gonna go ahead and ask your patient to do the movement that you showed them. Perfect. And you can see that everything is moved with this motion. So you have to go refine everything, and that's okay. So our acromion is now back here, and we want to go an inch below that while staying in the correct plane and having our stationary arm pointed towards the floor. And then we're going to take our movable arm and follow the humerus. And don't hesitate to really get down and make sure that you're on the right spot here. You always want to stay in the correct plane. Midline to the humerus. Okay, you can relax. And Jocelyn has 0 to 137 degrees of shoulder flexion. The next movement we are going to be measuring is shoulder extension. You want to start by positioning your client feet flat on the ground in the 90, 90, 90. They're going to have their hand in the oven mitt again. And normal range for this movement is 0 to 60 degrees. Your axis is going to be in the same place as it was for shoulder flexion, so on the acromion process, but an inch below. So right about there. Your stationary arm is going to be midline to the trunk and pointed towards the floor, with your movable arm following the humerus. So go ahead and do the movement we discussed. Okay. It's really nice when they're in extension. You can feel it pretty good. So then you want to midline to the humerus. Can you go any farther? Okay, we got a couple of degrees out of there. So Jocelyn has 0 to 35 degrees of shoulder. All right, the next movement we are going to be measuring is shoulder abduction. You want to start by positioning your client with feet flat on the ground, sitting in a chair in a 90, 90, 90. Normal range of motion for this is 180 degrees. You want their arm to their side with their palm facing out in that oven mitt again. Your axis is going to go on the glenohumeral joint back here, which will place your stationary arm pointed towards the ground, and our movable arm is going to follow midline to the humerus. Okay. So go ahead and do the movement we discussed. Beautiful. There you go. Okay, you can relax. And Jocelyn has 0 to 156 degrees of shoulder abduction. The next movement we are going to be measuring is shoulder horizontal abduction. For this movement, you want your client positioned with their feet flat on the ground, seated in a supported chair, with their arm abducted to be parallel to the ground. Perfect. The axis, normal range for this is 0 to 40 degrees. Your axis is going to be placed on the acromion process, which is a bit easier to find in this position. So right there, so you're gonna go right on top, which will leave your movable and stationary arm midline to the humerus for the time being. Once the client does the motion, your stationary arm will stay parallel to the floor and your movable arm will follow midline to the humerus. So go ahead and do the movement we discussed. Okay, you can relax. And Jocelyn has 0 to 37 degrees of shoulder horizontal abduction. The next movement we are going to be measuring is shoulder horizontal adduction. You want to start by having your client seated, feet flat on the ground, 90, 90, 90 in a supported chair. Their arm is going to be abducted and parallel to the ground. Normal range of motion for this movement is 0 to 130 degrees. For this one, your axis is going to be on top of the acromion process, which in abduction is a little bit easier to find here. Your stationary and movable arm are both going to be midline to the humerus for the time being. Your stationary arm will stay parallel to the ground while your movable follows midline to the humerus. So always double check yourself, make sure you found. Okay, go ahead and do the movement we discussed. And make sure you're parallel to the ground with this one. It's easy to have it drop. And then, can you go any farther? Okay, you can relax. And Jocelyn has 0 to 105 degrees of shoulder horizontal abduction. All right, the next movement we are going to be measuring is shoulder internal rotation. So for this movement, you want your client positioned feet flat on the ground in a 90, 90, 90. Their shoulder is going to be abducted, so their humerus is parallel to the ground. You're going to have your axis on the olecranon process, and your movable arm and stationary arm are going to be in the middle of the ulna. Normal range for this movement is 0 to 70 degrees. Once the client does the motion, our stationary arm is going to stay parallel to the ground and our movable arm will follow midline of the ulna. So go ahead and do the movement that we discussed. Okay, make sure you realign with the olecranon. Is that as far as you can go?
Yeah.
Okay. And the hardest part about this one is making sure that you stay parallel to the ground and you don't let your GONI drop. So kind of step back and check yourself here. Middle of the ulna, which got that there to kind of. Okay, you can relax. And Jocelyn has 0 to 42 degrees of shoulder internal rotation. The next movement we are going to be measuring is shoulder external rotation. So you want to start with your client position, feet flat on the ground in 90, 90, 90, with their shoulder abducted so that the humerus is parallel to the floor. Your axis is going to be on the olecranon process. Your stationary and movable arm are going to be midline to the ulna, and we are keeping in mind the average range of motion of 0 to 90 degrees. Once the client does the movement, the stationary arm will stay parallel to the ground and the movable arm will follow the ulna. So go ahead and do the movement that we discussed. Beautiful. You have to line yourself back up. Make sure you don't drop your GONI for an accurate measurement. Here we go. I think we're good here. All right, and Jocelyn has 0 to 85 degrees of shoulder external rotation. The next movement we are going to be measuring is elbow flexion. So for this movement, you want your client seated, feet flat on the ground, and 90, 90, 90. They're gonna have their arm out to their side with their palm facing up. Your axis, I should say that the average range for this is 0 to 150 degrees. And for this one, your axis is going to be on the lateral epicondyle. You mind flexing your elbow for me? Perfect. Okay, so it's a little bit easier to feel once you have them do it. Go ahead and straighten back out for me. Thank you very much. All right. And you want your GONI to be midline to the humerus and the radius. Okay. Go ahead and do the movement we discussed. Okay. Get back centered on that. Really have to get down there to make sure. All right, you can relax. And Jocelyn has 0 to 144 degrees of elbow flexion. Okay. The next movement we are going to be measuring is forearm supination. You want to start off by having your client position feet flat on the ground with their elbow tucked and wrist in neutral position, holding a pen or a pencil. Normal range for this movement is 0 to 80 to 85 degrees. You want to position your axis in the middle of the third phalanx with your stationary arm pointed towards the floor and your movable arm pointed towards the ceiling, following the line of the object they're holding. Go ahead and do the movement we discussed. Your movable arm is going to follow the object, the tip of it here. Okay, go ahead and relax. And Jocelyn has 0 to 71 degrees of forearm supination. The next movement we are going to be measuring is forearm pronation. You want to start by positioning your client feet flat on the ground with the elbow tucked to the side and wrist in neutral position. You want them to be holding a pen or a pencil, and you want that to be sticking out a little bit because you will be following this with your movable arm. Normal range for this motion is 0 to 70 to 80 degrees. You want to start with your axis placed on the PIP joint of the third finger. You want your stationary arm pointed towards the floor with the movable arm pointed towards the ceiling and in line with the object they're holding. Okay, go ahead and do the movement we discussed. You want your movable arm to follow the tip of the pencil here. And Jocelyn has 0 to 72 degrees of forearm pronation.